Are you going to use this property as a holiday home? If so, are you going to make any compromises? If your idea of a holiday home is a property in the middle of nowhere, 15 miles down a dirt track, it will not rent out very well. You'll let it for a few weeks a year, but not enough to make it commercially viable. So just how much compromise are you prepared to make in order to buy a property that is more lettable? Are you going to use the property at weekends? This may sound self-evident, but we send out a questionnaire to our clients and we ask them what they're intending to do, and we ask them also at a different place which countries they're already interested in. A few weeks ago I had one back, yes, I intend to use my property at weekends. Countries I'm most interested in, Thailand. Now, that isn't going to work. So if you want to use your property at weekend, you want to buy in a place which is accessible and easily and cheaply accessible, which of course tends to suggest low-cost flights or low-cost rail travel. Do you want to manage the property yourself? You have lots of choices when it comes to property management, and we have another seminar in this series about how to do that. But basically they come down to managing the property yourself with a minimum amount of local help to do the cleaning and so on, or having a professional management company take over the role. Now, we have no doubt that our clients who make the most money out of property abroad are those who manage it themselves. But we also have no doubt that our clients who make the least money out of property abroad are those who manage it themselves and do it badly. So if you've got the skills, the expertise and the inclination, have a go. Otherwise, get a professional to do it for you. Do you want to live in the area? Many of our clients have already decided that they're going to retire, shall we say, to Provence, and they say it'd be a good idea to buy some properties near to where I'm going to be living so that I can have them managed professionally now, but take over that role myself once I've retired. Now, that may work very well. Other times it doesn't. Sometimes the place you've chosen to retire to may just not be a good investment location, in which case we can sometimes say to you, look, we can do that, but you'd actually make more money by buying a property not in Provence, but in Marbella or in Nice or in wherever else it might be. You then won't have to be on site to look after guests, and you will be able to use it yourself when it's empty for your holidays. Think about the climate, think about your time frame. Are you trying to make money over 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Are you prepared to join with others in a bigger scheme? Most of our British clients are not. Most of our British clients say, I've got 150,000 to invest, I want to buy some property somewhere, rent it out, don't want to mess about with other people. A lot of our American clients, on the other hand, will say, I've got $300,000 to invest. If I can get some friends and neighbours together, we can maybe have $2 million. We can put $2 million into a bigger project and maybe make a little bit more money. And finally, what is your budget? You have to realise that there are some places that are great for investment, but which require a high level of budget, and other places where you can start with maybe as little as £15,000 or £20,000. And that brings me back to the main point, and that is that going to look at the property is the last stage in this process, not the first. You need to make all of these preparations before you get there. So why are you buying a property abroad? Well, for our clients, there are four main reasons. One is work. Maybe their company is going to send them to work for 2 years in Munich or New York or wherever it may be. They're a small number. Lots of our clients are buying a lifestyle purchase. They're buying a holiday home. They're buying in a place they like. But increasingly, they also want that to be an investment as well, or at least partly to pay its way by income it can generate. Another large number are buying for retirement. But these days, the biggest percentage is buying as an investment, either a pure investment or an investment coupled with a holiday home. And that is now something over half of our entire client base. If you're buying as an investor, then you have to decide, is this a pure investment? In other words, is it a property that you have no interest in and which you may never ever even go to yourself? Or is it a holiday home that is intended to pay its way? And if it's a holiday home, just how many compromises are you prepared to make to buy a property that maybe doesn't quite meet your dream for a holiday home, but which is a better letting proposition or financial proposition in that it's got perhaps more capital growth associated with it? Then you have to think about your investment strategy. There are many, many different ways in which you can get involved in buying property abroad. We cover these in much more detail in our seminar, Buying a Property, the Basics, but we're going to have a quick look at them now. The first is residential buy-to-let, and that's what the majority of our clients do. It's the easiest, they're most comfortable with it, and it also allows them to use the property themselves for their own holidays in between lets. But that's by no means the end of the range of opportunities. We have commercial buy-to-let. Instead of buying an apartment, you buy a bar or a restaurant or a hotel room. Or we have people who are buying off-plan and what they call flipping, that is to say selling on before completion. You buy a property, you put a certain percentage down, it takes 2, maybe 3 years to complete the development. By the time it's finished, it's gone up in value, so you sell at a profit. Buying using a mortgage. That's really the same as the commercial or the residential buy-to-let, but you're using someone else's money instead of your own. And that imposes a different set of disciplines. You need to be even more sure you're buying the right property. Or you buy land. Historically, in most of the emerging markets, land goes up in value much faster than bricks and mortar. And so if you've got the money to buy land and sit on it, then that can be a very useful investment, particularly if you're buying land which is not at the moment licensed for building, but which you think is going to be licensed later on. More dangerous, more risky, more difficult, but potentially a very good performer. Of course, it doesn't generate you any income, so you've got to have the cash to do it. Or if you're interested in doing that, what about becoming a developer? If you become a developer, that means that you can actually buy a piece of land and build a number of apartments or houses on it. And if you're not happy with that, which can be a very profitable way of doing things, what about going into a joint venture with a developer? A local developer who has lots of land and expertise but no cash. And in many of the emerging market countries, the banking systems are not mature enough, not liquid enough, to be able to provide development funding for developers. So the developer will very happily take in a partner to provide the finance, with the developer providing the expertise. Now, that can work very well. Of course, you have to know who you're dealing with, and you have to take some safeguards to make sure that he's not going to take your money and run. But you can be looking at returns of 50–60% per annum on your investment doing this. If that's a bit risky for you, there is a safer way, and that is making loans to a developer. It's safer because you are not dependent on the profit that developer makes. You are getting a fixed interest on your loan that you've made to him. And because that loan is going to permit the developer to do the development which he would not otherwise be able to do because he hasn't got the cash, he will pay you very good money for that loan. And we're talking about rates of 25, 30, 35% per year. Now, of course, a loan to a developer in a foreign country, pretty risky thing to do. So you need to get good legal advice, and you need to make sure that your money is protected in some way, ideally by way of either you're owning the land that the builder is building on, or by having a charge or mortgage over that land. Some people don't want to do straightforward buying and selling type of investments, and they will perhaps invest through an investment fund. They like real estate as an investment category, but they can't be bothered with all of the aggravation that goes with having to find the units to buy and then all of the paperwork involved. So they will put money in an investment fund, the managers of that fund will buy the real estate, and they will, one hopes, make a profit which is shared amongst the fund holders. A bit like owning shares in Tesco, but where they buy and sell houses and not baked beans. Not very exciting. A more exciting way is an investment club. Now, I'm a great enthusiast for investment club. I'm not talking about the investment clubs now that you see advertised all the time, these big commercial ones. I'm talking about you and a group of friends and family or relatives or neighbours or even strangers getting together, 10, 15 of you, pooling your resources. I'll come back to that later. And some people will choose to use their pension fund, and I'll come back to that later as well. One cautionary word about flipping off-plan properties. If you have only one exit route, which is to sell on before completion, please don't do it. You will lose your money, because the rules are such that the person who desperately needs to sell is the one who can't find the buyer. And then the completion date comes, you haven't got the money to complete, you lose your deposit. So view investments, property investments, as a medium or long-term investment. Buy a property that you would be proud to own for 10 or 15 years because it's a great property which you think is going to go up in value and generate you good levels of income. And if, when the time comes, somebody comes along and says, I would like to buy that off you for a price that you can't refuse, then by all means accept that offer, but view it as a bonus. So what's the time frame for your property investment? Are you trying to make money over 2 years, 10 years, 20 years? The property you buy will depend upon that time frame. Depending on what you're trying to achieve, you could be buying a different property in a different country. And if you're thinking of investing long-term, for say 20 years, are you wanting to keep the same property for use as a holiday home, or are you prepared to buy and sell as the markets develop over that period of time? What's your attitude to risk? I've touched on this earlier on. It is absolutely vital to the decision-making process that you decide just how much risk are you prepared to take. And one of the things that worries me a lot at the moment is the number of clients I'm seeing who are desperate to be there in the countries which are growing at 20, 30, 35% a year. They want that profit, but they ignore the fact that in some of those countries there is a lot more danger, and where there is a danger they may actually lose their money. Not everybody ought to be taking that element of risk. If you are a city trader and you've just made £1 million bonus this year, and probably there's another million next year, then a large amount of risk is something you can live with. If you lose the money, it's only £1 million and there's more to come. But if you're investing your life savings or your divorce settlement or your pension lump sum or your redundancy payment, you have to take a more measured and realistic approach to risk. And of course people say, but if I find that beach first, I'm going to be the one who makes the most money. And that is possibly true. But think back to D-Day. The soldiers who found the beach first got slaughtered in their thousands, and those who arrived a couple of days later drove ashore in a jeep and didn't even get their feet wet. They were the smart people. You do not necessarily need to be the very first into a new market to still make money out of that market. Coming along 6 months or 12 months later could be a much more sensible approach. What about diversification? Do you believe in buying a range of properties around the world, or do you put all your eggs in one basket? We believe very strongly that diversification is the way forward, and of course that does mean something of a budget to think about. You'll have to spend a little bit more than you would if you were just buying one property, but not necessarily huge amounts more. £50,000 can get you a diversified portfolio in 2 or 3 countries. If you haven't got the money to buy all of those properties today, but you're thinking of doing so in the future, let's buy the first property with that in mind so that it's part of a plan to have a diversified holding over a period of time. And if you haven't got enough money to do that, well, maybe you should be thinking about investing in a property investment fund or a property club, both of which I'll talk about later. When we talk about a portfolio of properties, we mean different properties in different countries, different locations, different countries, currencies, different cultures, different climates, types of property, types of tenant, and so on. And if you do that, then what you should find is that it's going to be incredibly rare for all of those properties to do badly at the same time. So where are you going to buy? Basically, the places where you might be thinking of buying property fall into two groups. There are what we call the old favourites, and there are the emerging markets. The old favourites, places like Spain, Portugal, the United States, they've shown enormous amount of capital growth over the years. Will that continue? Well, the answer is it probably won't. Places like Spain saw 15–20% per year capital growth for year after year after year. Great investments at the time. But Spain is now a mature market where, like every other mature market, we would expect to see slow and steady growth as time goes on. Now, that capital growth has led to a number of problems because prices have risen to the extent that they've probably risen too far. And in the last 12 months or so, we've seen quite a major correction of prices in Spain, as indeed we have in certain places in the United States. And that, curiously, gives rise to opportunities for bargains. Many of our really canny investor clients who deserted Spain and indeed the United States as an investment location 2–3 years ago are now getting back in there because they can see bargains. Recently I dealt with a client who was buying a property on the Costa del Sol on a golf course. 2–3 years ago, that would have cost €500,000. We've just bought it for $289,000. It was a distressed sale, but a true bargain. And at that price, he's going to do very well. And of course, the great thing about these old favourites is that they have massive numbers of tourists, huge appeal to tenants. People know them well. They don't think twice about renting private accommodation there. If you're looking at particularly Spain, our view is that the strong future prospects are for the retirement market and the golf market. The Spanish anticipate another 4 million retirees from Northern Europe going to live in Spain over the next 3, 4, 5 years. And that's going to be one huge difference to the market, especially in the coastal areas of Spain. And golf, of course, just grows and grows in importance. The emerging markets, on the other hand, no doubt about it, higher risk, higher reward, although not necessarily suicidal risk, as we discussed earlier on. So you have to choose the market that's got an acceptable level of risk for you. And you have also to recognize that even if you do that, it is going to be a more rocky road than it's going to be if you buy in somewhere such as Spain. In Spain, 3 million foreigners have already bought a home. So every lawyer, every tax office, every notary, every town hall knows exactly what to do. If you go and buy a property in the Transylvanian mountains, then you may find that you are the first foreigner that official has ever dealt with. And as a result, he won't know what to do. And when a badly paid public official doesn't know what to do, his first reaction is normally to turn down your application and hope that his mate is on duty when you come back next week. So you just have to accept it's going to take longer. There will be little dead ends, not dangerous, just a little bit frustrating and time-consuming. But that is part and parcel of being a pioneer. It's what happens when you go to an emerging market. You may find in these emerging markets there is, at least in the short term, limited tourist letting potential. The tourist numbers are going up and up and up, but for the first 2 or 3 years, people tend to go and visit on package deals. It's only when you know the country, it's only when you know that there will be a taxi at the airport when you arrive, the driver will speak English, and he will take you to your destination without mugging you, that you're going to have the confidence to rent privately. And so for the first 2 or 3 years, you may find your rental potential is very low, and your rental income is maybe 2% a year, not 5 or 6% a year. In some emerging markets, there are lots of expat business lettings, where new companies have set up in the country, and they've brought lots and lots of their own people to manage those enterprises. A good example of that at the moment is in Slovakia, where Renault and Kia Motors have both set up new car factories. Lots and lots of expats looking for property. What tends to happen, though, is in 2 or 3 years' time, the junior managers will have been replaced by local people. In 5 years' time, the middle managers will have been replaced by local people. And in 10 years' time, maybe all of the managers except one representative will have been replaced. And the local people will want different types of property from the property that the expats want. And so that market tends to be transient. And if you're looking to let to the local market, which is a perfectly sensible thing to do, you have to buy properties that are designed round that market and which can be rented for a price that market can afford to pay. Remember what I was saying earlier about GDP per head. If the salary level here is £5,000 per year, and in many countries that's a lot of money, then you're not going to be able to rent out your apartment for £3,000 a year. Just not going to happen. When you're looking at the emerging markets, you also have to think particularly carefully about time frame. Some are going to move much faster than others. And if you're thinking of selling on before completion, flipping, then be very, very careful. Who will buy from you? There are some of these emerging markets where over 90% of our clients are investors, and there is not a sign of any end users in that marketplace. Now, in a year or two's time, that may change, but you have to be clear about who is going to buy your property at a price that you're going to be prepared to accept when it's delivered to you in 2 years' time. So, where should you buy? Well, you know the answer to this already. It's location, location, location. Everybody says it, still true. The right area, the right property, and the right price. And for us, the right area is all about local attractions. And that can either be something specific near to the property, can be a huge thing like Disney bringing millions of tourists a year, or it can be a lady in your village who's doing cookery classes and you've done a deal. Her one student per week stays in your accommodation. Or it can be a generic attraction. Golf, the sea, being in a world-class city, all of those offer great rental potential. Many people talk about the right price rental balance. In other words, getting the maximum rental income for the minimum cash expenditure. We think for most of our clients that's not right. For most of our clients, they're at least as interested in the capital growth as they are the rental income. And they may be prepared to accept a place that generates a little bit less rental in return for more capital growth. Now, all of this suggests the need to get some advice, because you may not have the time or the inclination to be able to gather all of this information together. And the most important thing is, don't take the advice of the estate agent. The estate agent is making his money by selling you the property. He will tell you that every property in the portfolio is the best property ever invented for rental purposes. And that may not necessarily be true. If you're buying an investment property, you need to be aware that each area will have a different best buy. In some places, the best buy might be a 2-bedroom apartment, or in other places it might be a studio, or in other places it might be a 4-bedroom villa. You need to understand what it is you're looking for. Understand that if you are looking for income, it might be a different best buy from the best buy that you would be looking for if you were buying for capital growth. If you're looking for a property that will resell easily, it might be a different best buy from a property that was the best buy if you were trying to generate income. And of course, if it's a property you want for your own needs, then if you need a 3-bedroom house, then we should be looking to invest in a place where a 3-bedroom house is the best buy and not something that's an also-ran.